Hello, welcome to the A Book a Day channel. Today, I'll be interpreting the book Why Buddhism Is True for you. In the next 20 minutes or so, I'll elucidate the essence of the book. The significance of Buddhism is to liberate us from the limited perspective imposed by natural selection, allowing us to observe and experience the world from a higher level. This is a book published in August 2017, authored by the science writer and evolutionary psychologist Robert Wright. Many people are likely familiar with Robert Wright, as his previous two books, Non-Zero, The Logic of Human Destiny and The Moral Animal, Why We Are the Way We Are, have been well received. However, the title Why Buddhism Is True might still be surprising to you. An American writing about Buddhism? Isn't that something mysterious from the East? In reality, Buddhism is quite popular in the United States, with many people studying Buddhism. What we are discussing here is not the conventional understanding of Buddhism but a westernized version of Buddhism. This version essentially removes all the supernatural elements from Asian Buddhism and retains only the philosophical and meditative aspects. You might have several questions upon hearing this. Is Western Buddhism authentic? Is Buddhism superstitious? Is this book promoting religion? Not at all. We are discussing Buddhism in the context of Buddhist philosophy. The advantage of Buddhist philosophy is that it allows for critical thinking. It doesn't resort to mysticism and always explains its concepts in the simplest, clearest language possible. What Robert Wright aims to do in this book is to use modern scientific knowledge to explain some Buddhist concepts and viewpoints. The book provides a lot of evidence from modern science to show that the statements made by the Buddha in his time are valid. These concepts and viewpoints all remove the supernatural elements. There are no concepts of reincarnation, karmic retribution, or supernatural powers. Essentially, we view the Buddha as an enlightened philosopher. The primary benefit of this book is that it is relatively straightforward and lacks any mystification, presenting its ideas in modern, understandable language. This allows you to analyze and debate it, as you would with general philosophy, and use modern scientific knowledge to assess it. Now, let's proceed by explaining 3 common Buddhist concepts to understand the basic ideas and logic of this book. In the first part, we'll talk about the fundamental Buddhist concept of dukkha, which is about where our suffering originates. In the second part, we'll explore what meditation is all about. In the third part, we'll discuss the meaning of the frequently heard phrase, form is emptiness. First part. Let's begin with the first part. Where does suffering come from? We all know that suffering is an important concept in Buddhism. The Buddha began his spiritual journey after encountering the 4 kinds of suffering: birth, old age, sickness, and death. But what does suffering really mean? Does it imply that the world deliberately causes us to suffer? Or is suffering related to one's level of enlightenment, where the enlightened are free from suffering? For instance, there's a belief that suffering arises due to attachment. If you are less attached, you won't suffer as much. In this book, Robert Wright suggests that suffering is essentially about dissatisfaction, a perspective grounded in Buddhist teachings. He provides an explanation based on evolutionary psychology. From the standpoint of biological evolution, the purpose of human existence is to propagate one's genes. To achieve this, we engage in various activities such as eating, procreating, competing, and gaining social status. However, humans are thinking beings, and some may seek to appreciate the beauty of nature, savor the tranquility of life, and have no interest in gene propagation. How does natural selection encourage us to willingly engage in these activities? Wright argues that natural selection has set 3 conditions for our psychology. 1. Completing these activities results in happiness. For instance, eating and falling in love bring joy. 2. Happiness is short-lived. It cannot last for an extended period. If we experience sustained, long-lasting happiness from a single activity, there would be no motivation to engage in that activity again. Therefore, natural selection encourages us to repeat these actions. 3. In light of the first 2 conditions, the brain should focus on the first and ignore the second. If the brain becomes consciously aware that happiness is fleeting, it might abandon the pursuit of happiness and begin questioning the meaning of life. In essence, natural selection doesn't care if we are truly happy. It simply uses happiness as bait to drive us toward the goal of gene propagation. From the perspective of gene propagation, this mechanism makes sense. However, for individuals, the situation can be quite sad. Life is a constant pursuit, and even when we occasionally achieve our goals, the happiness is short-lived. Scientific experiments have supported this mechanism. For example, researchers conducted experiments with monkeys. They placed a light in a cage, and as soon as the light turned on, they provided a few drops of juice to the monkeys, which the monkeys enjoyed. Scientists closely monitored the dopamine release in the monkeys' brains. Dopamine release indicates feelings of happiness. Initially, dopamine was released in the monkeys' brains after they received the juice. This made it clear that the juice made the monkeys happy. However, after repeating the experiment multiple times, the monkeys learned the pattern. They knew the light turning on meant they would receive juice. At this point, scientists noticed that even before the juice was delivered, just when the light turned on, the monkeys' brains began releasing dopamine. The anticipation of the juice made the monkeys happy. Over time, the dopamine released upon seeing the light increased, while the dopamine from actually drinking the juice decreased. It seemed that all the happiness was in the anticipation, and the actual consumption of the juice was less joyful. Isn't this true for humans too? Before doing something, we think it will bring immense happiness, but once we do it, we often feel empty. This is suffering. You are never truly satisfied. What we consider happiness is, in fact, an illusion. From an evolutionary psychology perspective, all our emotions are essentially coded by natural selection to help us make a good or bad judgment about the external environment. If an action benefits gene propagation, it makes us happy, and we are motivated to repeat it. If it's harmful, it makes us feel pain, and we avoid it. However, these codes can be flawed. The first type of error is when the environment changes, but our coding remains the same. For example, we often crave sweet, high-fat foods, which was useful in times of food scarcity as it helped us consume more nutrients. But in today's world of abundant food, indulging in high-fat, high-sugar foods can harm our health. So Wright argues that our emotional attachment to high-fat, high-sugar foods is a false emotion. The second type of error is called a false positive. For instance, if a primitive human is out in the wild and hears a noise in the bushes, how should they react? The sound has a 99% chance of being caused by the wind, but there's a 1% chance it's a tiger in the bushes. Would the primitive human ignore the small probability event and keep walking? Of course not. The correct response is to flee, no matter what the source of the sound might be. This fear of rustling in the bushes was helpful in a primitive society, but today it can lead to various forms of anxiety. In ancient times, everyone was familiar, and the impression you made on others was crucial, and being looked down upon was a miserable experience. However, today we interact with strangers more often, and most people don't really care about who you are. Yet, we still obsess about the impressions we make on others. So it seems there are many misconceptions in our various emotions. We think we will find happiness, but happiness is short-lived. We have strong feelings for sugar, yet excessive sugar consumption is detrimental to us. We worry incessantly about various things, but often these worries are unfounded. Hence, Buddhism states that life is full of suffering, and our worries are all illusory. From an evolutionary psychology perspective, the happiness we experience is meant to be short-lived, which ensures that we are never satisfied. This is the suffering in life. Simultaneously, our various emotions, as set by evolution, don't necessarily reflect the real world, so our worries might be empty. This is Robert Wright's explanation of suffering and worries from an evolutionary psychology perspective, which covers the first part of the book. Since worries and suffering are essentially illusions created by the mechanism of natural selection, how should one deal with or transcend them? Perhaps meditation is a good method. So what exactly is meditation? That's what we'll explore in the second part. Second part. Of course, when we talk about meditation, it cannot encompass all the concepts of meditation. Meditation can be roughly divided into three traditions. One is the Zen tradition, which involves contemplating koans, sometimes employing verbal paradoxes, leading to moments of enlightenment. It's more suitable for poets. Another is the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, which focuses on visual imagery, making it more suited for artists. Robert Wright practices Vipassana, which is a form of mindfulness meditation. In simple terms, Vipassana is about cultivating mindfulness and is more suited for psychologists. It requires you to become your own observer, examining your emotions, much like a psychologist analyzing themselves. In the Western world, especially among intellectuals, meditation is highly popular, with companies like Google even providing meditation rooms for employees. However, Vipassana meditation isn't merely for relaxation or cultivating aesthetics. Its goal is to gain insight into reality and achieve genuine personal freedom. The practice of meditation is quite straightforward. If you desire a sense of ritual, find a quiet place, lay down a mat, and sit on it. There don't seem to be stringent posture requirements. The main thing is not to fall asleep. The first step is to sit down, and the second step is to focus solely on your breath without thinking about anything else. Undistracted concentration on your breath. This is far from simple. When a person does nothing, the default state of the brain is random wandering, with thoughts and emotions continually surfacing. You may engage in daydreaming. We actually enjoy this state, and it can lead to creative discoveries. However, meditation specifically demands that your thoughts don't roam freely. You must focus entirely on your breath. The longer you can maintain this focus, the deeper your practice. Mastery of this focused concentration allows you to escape from the torment of various emotions and thoughts, avoiding the control of different modules in your brain, ultimately granting you freedom. Concentrating on your breath is not an end in itself. The actual aim is to practice gaining control over your own mind. If you can concentrate for an extended period, you will enter an exceptionally tranquil state. Wright has achieved this state and described how, after prolonged concentration, he experienced profound tranquility and immense joy. Once you reach the level of extended concentration, you have two options. In Buddhist teachings, there is a concept called the Noble Eightfold Path, which can be roughly understood as 8 methods for spiritual practice. The 7th and 8th elements of this path are right mindfulness and right concentration. If you choose to maintain your concentration solely on your breath, your practice is referred to as right concentration, which is the method of Theravada Buddhism. However, in Vipassana, attaining right concentration through breath focus is just the foundational practice. After achieving right concentration, the next stage is right mindfulness. Right mindfulness demands that you employ the same level of concentration in your meditation practice in every aspect of your daily life. You can use the same intense focus to appreciate a flower, savor the taste of a meal, or apply it to anything. The aim is not mere concentration, but to gain insight from these practices. You might ask, isn't this simply concentration? It's not quite the same. I can concentrate on reading a book, but during the reading process, my thoughts follow the author, and I might have unrelated thoughts. Such concentration is relatively easy. However, the focus in meditation in essence is sustained attention, concentrating only on one thing, excluding any extraneous thoughts. Meditation proficiency comes in at least 2 stages. The first stage allows you to be untroubled by intense emotions, disassociating the self from various emotions. Achieving this stage enables you to immediately experience the benefits of meditation. For example, if you have a toothache, most people would complain and resist the pain, causing it to intensify and consume their entire mind. The practice of meditation entails recognizing the existence of this painful sensation, and then distancing yourself from it, not dwelling on it, but continuing to focus solely on your breath. The pain remains, but you are no longer a slave to the emotion. Once you reach this level, you will no longer be driven by emotions in your daily life, and you'll always be able to adjust your mood. The higher stage is when you can completely disassociate the self from all thoughts and emotions, truly achieving undistracted focus on your breath, with no other thoughts. In reality, most of the time, it's various minor thoughts that disturb our concentration. For instance, you might wonder what tasks you need to do at work tomorrow, eagerly anticipate a meeting with someone you admire, or reminisce about a thrilling moment on the sports field. Wright suggests that these thoughts share some commonalities, such as being related to the past or the future, rather than the present. Additionally, these thoughts often pertain to the self. Humans are social animals, and we always think about matters related to people. Lastly, these thoughts are usually generated by a specific module within the brain, which is a product of evolution. In simple terms, thoughts are produced by modules, and they attempt to capture your attention through certain emotions, trying to hijack your brain. How do you disassociate from these thoughts? The method remains the same. When a thought arises, acknowledge its existence, and then distance yourself from it. Don't think about it. Continue to focus on your breath. It's like standing at a train station, and the thoughts are trains arriving and departing. You don't board any of them. In other words, for both strong emotions and regular thoughts, our approach isn't to suppress or eliminate them but to admit their existence. Allow them to appear but not let them influence us. Reaching the first stage allows you to choose your emotions freely. Achieving the second stage allows you to choose your thoughts in the present moment, without anything disturbing or controlling you. This ability is indeed remarkable, and, in Buddhist terms, is the path to gradually liberating oneself from suffering. However, this practice is exceedingly challenging. You cannot achieve it by just pushing forcefully in one direction. It is filled with contradictions. The first contradiction is between non-action and success. That is, during meditation, the more you strive to concentrate, the harder it is to achieve concentration. Success is attained when you stop pursuing it. The second contradiction is that the people who need meditation training the most are the ones who find it hardest to enter the meditative state. The third contradiction is that the more you resist a particular thought or emotion, the more you engage in a struggle against it, and the more it controls you. The fourth contradiction is that the more you understand that people cannot control their emotions, it's emotions that control people, the better you can free yourself from the control of emotions. In other words, if you immediately assert that you can control yourself, you will not be able to control yourself. Realizing that you cannot control yourself is the first step towards gaining control. These contradictions make the training of meditation immensely challenging. If you don't believe it, you can give it a try. So we've discussed the first part about suffering and worries and the second part about meditation. Both of these parts are related to Buddhist concept of emptiness. Worries are empty emotions. Are empty. And there's another concept related to emptiness that's more familiar to us, and that's form as emptiness. These four words form the content of our third part. Third part. Regarding form as emptiness, the book explains that recognizing the world as empty is beneficial, because it allows you to see that many things in the world are illusory, and you can indeed detach from them. What does this mean? Let's discuss this in detail below. Once, Wright was attending a meditation training class, and outside the classroom, there were workers using electric saws to cut wood, filling the room with the noisy sound of the saws. The noise from the saws was quite discomforting, but using the power of meditation, Wright first accepted his feeling of disliking the sound of the saws and then examined this feeling. At this point, the sound of the saw still existed, but it seemed to lack a negative emotional charge. As time passed, Wright even started to find the sound of the saws rather pleasant. He could discern a musical quality in it. This experience was the first time Wright experienced form as emptiness. Wright explains that the sound of the saws is just an objective existence. The reason why we dislike the sound of the saws is due to the associations it triggers. When you think of an electric saw, you associate it with the power to cut wood or even harm people, representing a force of destruction. These fearful associations are something that humans add as connotations to the sound of the saws. So-called form is the connotations you associate with the sound of the saws. You might call it the electric saw form. One might assume that emptiness implies non-existence, suggesting that everything in the world is fundamentally unreal. However, Wright suggests that the widely accepted view among Buddhist scholars is that emptiness does not mean that everything in the world is empty, it means that the connotations we attribute to everything are empty. This understanding has psychological support. A psychologist named Paul Bloom argues that humans have a natural tendency to attribute meaning to things. For example, a measuring tape is inexpensive when you buy a new one at the store. But if it was used by a former U.S. president, it could be sold for tens of thousands of dollars at auction. Similarly, a wedding ring is just a ring, but when it's been on your finger for 30 or 40 years, it takes on profound significance. The history of an object imparts meaning to it. Psychologist Robert Zadront takes this a step further and argues that we automatically attribute meaning to everything we see. For instance, the letter Q, if you associate it with QQ, you might feel a certain fondness. If you associate it with Q, you might have different emotions. In sum, we have emotions about everything. According to Wright's perspective, natural selection demands that we make rapid judgments about everything around us to ensure our survival. If you don't feel aversion when you hear an electric saw, you might be less skilled at avoiding danger. The emotions we have about things are the connotations we attribute to them. That's the form. Following this logic, if form is what we assign as the connotations of things, then modern psychology has discovered some characteristics of form through experiments. First, form or the connotations is automatically generated. When we see something, we tend to describe it automatically tall, short, etc. Second, the connotations are influenced by stories. Why is Da Vinci's Mona Lisa famous? Because it has a story. Third, connotations are subjective. As in the saying, there are as many Hamlets as there are readers. So, we observe the world with colored glasses. We continuously attribute meaning to everything, and our world is one filled with form. This is the book's explanation of form. Wright tells a story about weeds that I can relate to. When my family first bought a house, the lawn was lush. But because we didn't maintain it well, some weeds like dandelions started to grow. Sometimes, I would pull out these weeds when I found them unsightly. My parents came to visit us in the United States, and one day they saw me pulling out dandelions. They asked why I was doing that. They said dandelions have some lovely little yellow flowers, and they add charm to the lawn. My parents were looking at it from an appreciation of nature's perspective, thinking dandelions were attractive. However, I was looking at it from the perspective of lawn maintenance, seeing dandelions as disruptive. So, are dandelions really weeds? Should they be allowed to grow? You see, the meanings we attribute to the world are subjective and full of contradictions. Form influences our experience of the real world. So, what would the world be like if we viewed it without these colored glasses? Wright suggests that maybe that would be a colorless world, and colorlessness would make you feel that the world is empty. While Wright hasn't reached a very advanced level of practice, he interviewed some advanced practitioners. One practitioner said that as you deepen your meditation practice, you genuinely begin to perceive emptiness, and your perception of the color of the world decreases. Of course, you still see all these things. A chair is still a chair, but their presence in your mind is not as strong. Wright's interpretation of colorless aligns with the discussion with the practitioner. The practitioner mentioned that in his practice, it's more like he first feels that everything is empty, which then leads him to feel nothing towards these things. In contrast, Wright's explanation is that you first diminish your emotions, which then allows you to see that everything is empty. The causal relationship may be reversed. But overall, recognizing colorless is akin to recognizing emptiness. The practitioner also brought up two very clear experiences. First, when you recognize emptiness and colorlessness, and then look at everything, you perceive things as more real than before. Second, people's preconceived emotions about these things are in reality not genuine. This is what form as emptiness is about. People often wonder if Buddhism might rob them of the joy of life and make everything seem meaningless. In reality, that's not the case. Buddhism aims to grant you greater freedom, allowing you to freely choose what you want to appreciate. By removing the interference of subjective imagination, you can have richer experiences. It's said that this leads to greater enjoyment and happiness. Alright, I've covered the basic logic of the proposition why Buddhism is true now. Let's summarize. From an evolutionary psychology perspective, the reason we tend to view everything with emotional coloring and subsequently develop various emotions is due to the way natural selection wired our brains. We perceive things that appear advantageous for propagating our own genes as good, greed, and the opposite as bad, aversion. You can think of Buddhism as a method to transcend the framework of natural selection. Why do we want to transcend natural selection? Because the setup of natural selection has inherent irrationality. Wright explains that the fundamental assumption natural selection provides to every individual is that you are special and you are more important than others. We consistently judge good and bad from a self-centered perspective. However, this basic assumption cannot be true, because there are so many species in the world, and it's impossible for each living being to be more important than the others. Not everyone can be special. From a human perspective, a piece of rotting, stinking meat is obviously a bad thing as it contains bacteria and is harmful to health. But from the bacteria's perspective, the rotting meat is their breeding ground. This is what form as emptiness signifies. When you realize this, that piece of meat is just a piece of meat, and it no longer carries the notions of good or bad. This is also why we initially mentioned that the essence of Buddhism is to liberate us from the limited perspective imposed by natural selection, and to observe and experience the world from a higher level. 2,600 years ago, the Buddha realized the limitations of the thinking imposed by natural selection. He didn't have any modern scientific tools, but he pinpointed the issues, found solutions, and developed a system of Buddhism that integrates knowledge and practice. The Buddha went very far, to the extent that people in later generations have found it challenging to comprehend his teachings. 2,600 years later, modern science has brought us back to the same set of problems, allowing us to learn the Buddha's methods and confirm his thoughts. Alright, that's it for today. Congratulations, you've completed another book.